Princess has decided, in its infinite wisdom, to throw some fresh problems at me, ones I've not had before. First one is the driver's seat, which, as I was reversing onto the drive today, collapsed. Marvellous. Fortunately, it is only the base. Now, I'm going to have to take the seat out later to fix this. I have another errand to run today, and if I take this seat out, I know full well there's a high chance that it's all just going to go wrong and I can't get the seat back in and then I can't do my errand. So to avoid that, I stole a couple of cushions out the house, shoved those under the seat. It's good enough. It should mean that the seat base, whatever's gone wrong, won't get any worse for the errand I'm doing, and then when I come home I can get the seat out and fix it. It's completely collapsed now, which is quite annoying. There's a rubber strip down that side and it's torn front to back, and that's going to be a nuisance to repair because there are no off-the-shelf parts for these seats. I don't have any spares. I'm going to have to get this out and find out what's wrong with it, what parts I need, and rebuild something from scratch. Perhaps the most annoying thing dealing with this car, or any other car that's now quite rare, is parts for random things that weren't really a problem when they were a few years old, but 30, 40, 50 years down the line, things wear out, and your driver's seat base is going to be one of them. It's the thing you're getting in and out of the most. The mistake I've probably made here is I've been using this car just as a car, as it's designed to be used, rather than pampering it and hiding it away in a garage. Personally, I think some cars it is sensible to hide, but cars like this it's not. Because if you don't use cars like this, if you don't get them out there, get them seen, and funnily enough, wear things out, there's not going to be any market to get the replacement parts when you yourself need them. Always a bit of a gamble, I suppose. I strongly suspect the Princess is in need of another round of repairs. I had hoped I'd broken the back of most of the problems, but I'm starting to get issues all across the board again. And again, this is normal when you run a car of any age. There are periods where a lot of problems appear, usually as items wear out, and you just need to address those problems as they come up. I had hoped this year that my main thing was going to be the paintwork. Instead, it looks like I'm going to be leak chasing again. I know I've got welding work to do. I've got one outer sill to replace, which I fortunately have a panel for. All four wheel arches need attention, again. Yeah. It's a bit of a slog. And even if I could afford to pay somebody else to do the work, nobody wants to work on this car. I get given the runaround. You tell them what it is and you're always met with, oh yeah, we'll do that, that'd be great. And then you try and pin them down to a price, a date, any sort of estimates. Yeah, then it changes. So it's hard work. I admire anybody out there who's running something rare, something oddball, or just something old as a regular car, because it's not easy. It's really not easy. And you have to do so much of it yourself. For now, I'm just going to have to put up with the problems that I have. I'm going to have to continue driving around them until I've finished the Maestro and got that back on the road. There might be a continuity error there, because I don't know when this video will go out. Yeah, and we'll get there. Rather than take the driver's seat out, I've got the passenger seat out here, because I wanted to understand what the diaphragm was underneath the seat. And now I see it, I can understand it. I haven't taken the driver's seat out yet, but I suspect this rubber here has torn. The way these are made, there's a metal rod here which is held into these metal rods that join onto the frame, so I can replace this without taking the cover off, which is good. This fabric, which is sort of like a Hessian type thing, is bonded to these rubber strips. Now, this rubber strip's degrading. You can see the black that's coming off my hands. This is turning into powder, so this one's going to go the same way, I think, soon. I did find this stuff, which is rubber webbing. It's slightly wider than original. That's okay. What I'm not sure of is how I bond this to the fabric. But hopefully I can just bond this onto the fabric, or some new fabric, and just put the new diaphragm in, and that will fix the seat. Take the Princess seats out. There's 4 bolts that go through these washers which go into the floor, and on the passenger side you have this wire here, which is what activates your seatbelt warning light over here when it feels like it. Mine isn't very reliable, never has been. So I need to pop out that seat, which at the moment is propped up with these cushions underneath, which I'm going to take out, just so my bum doesn't end up on the floor. But this seat has just completely collapsed, and it's gone this side, and from having as much of a look underneath as I can, and I feel with my hand it looks like the rubber section on this side has torn. It started at the back, went all the way to the front as I reversed onto the drive, which, you know, not ideal. Driver's seat out, and yeah, that would do it. The rubber has actually split all the way from the front all the way to the back, and like the passenger seat, it's kind of powdery to the touch. I shall have to have a bit of a think on how to repair that, but at least I know what the problem is. This piece here is where you would have the seatbelt warning light thing live. I don't know why there isn't one on the driver's side, there just isn't, but there's definitely one on the passenger side. So I'm going to remove this, which I think I can just unhook. Probably going to need some pliers for this job. Thought I was going to have to pry this open. Now as I was poking around, I just push down and it just pops out the frame. Brilliant. That makes life easier. There we go. So that's how the diaphragm base comes out. Which means I can probably swap the passenger one into here temporarily, just so I've got a working base, repair one and put things back together. That would be good. I bet it won't be as easy to put back together again though. Not too bad to remove, didn't have to remove any covers, which is great. This one you can see no expense spent there, they just used whatever vinyl they'd got to glue that in place. There was some bits of glue here and there holding things together, but who knows. Anyway, the passenger one is in pretty good shape. It's complete, the rubber is degrading quite a bit, you can see it's all over my hands here. But all the rods are there, it's okay. I'm probably just going to strengthen this one, leave as is. The driver's one, you can very clearly see the split, but there was another issue. Somebody has been in here before. This is missing its hook, and it looks like it's been chopped off. I have no idea why you would do that. So either I'm going to have to make a new one, or what I'm more likely going to do is just use the hooks, or one of the hooks from the passenger one, on the driver's one, because the driver's one is the one that gets used the most. And that should be okay. I'm going to have a bit of a think about how I'm going to put these back together. And when I've figured that out, I'll tell you what I'm doing. This is my first attempt at one of these new seat bases. Went fairly smoothly. The proof will be in the actual testing. I can't do it exactly the way they were done in the factory. It's like originally this seam here was heat pressed. Because when you look at the original one, you can see the texture of the fabric just showing through on the rubber. And yeah, it's still shedding black everywhere. I can't do that with the materials and tools I have, so I had to use contact adhesive instead. Now, I did do some test samples, and because the shear is this way, rather than like a peeling motion, that's the way I tested it, and I couldn't get the rubber and the fabric to come apart on this piece. The contact adhesive I'm using is this stuff, fairly readily available online, and not massively expensive. You do need to use 2 coats on the fabric and on the rubber because the fabric is a porous surface. So you put a coat on, leave it to dry for between 10 and 20 minutes, as it says on here, and then put a second coat on. The bond's really good on the fabric then after that. To help with the rubber, it's best to use a little wire brush. I prefer to use brass. It roughs up the surface but doesn't really damage the rubber. That just gives the glue something to hold on to. The only other thing I need to do on this is replace one of these missing hooks. Some time ago, I bought some copper-plated steel coat hangers. I bought these for rebuilding an arch lip, and they're pretty good for it. They weld nicely. It's not really a big problem, but I have lots left over. My first attempt unfortunately broke. If you work this too much, it fatigues and snaps, and I'd bent this round just a bit too far, and when I straightened it, it snapped. So I made myself another one, and that one seems okay. This wire is slightly thicker than the original wire, and it's not exactly the same shape, but it's close enough. To install these, you have to pull out the metal rod, and once you have this back as far as you need it, we then need to figure out where we're putting this replacement hook in. So this is the old intact seat base, and I just line up with the hooks that are already in, and I can see I need to put this one in here. The open end goes into the actual seat rail, and then the looped end there, that goes into the fabric. And you just push it through the gaps in the Hessian. At least you try to. There we go. Once that's through, you then push the wire back, and the idea here is the wire stays in the fabric and goes through that loop there. It's a bit fiddly. A lot of these sorts of jobs are. Now, there's no sign of any glue on the original wire, and honestly, once it's in and through all the hooks, the tension between the fabric and the hooks seems to hold it in place. If it turns out that it does move, I can always use some contact adhesive at the ends and hold it in place. But that seat base is now ready to go back on the seat. To work out how to build a new seat base, I first laid out the intact one. Now you can see it's a little bit wavy in the middle, and this is where the fabric has just stretched out over the last 40 years or so. That's what we're going to be replacing as well, so these seats should be a little bit nicer to sit in, I hope. You will need 2 strips of rubber webbing. I found this on eBay. There was a seller randomly selling lengths of it. The original is 3.5 inches wide, and this is 4 inches wide. Doesn't really matter as far as I can tell, because this basically gives you a little bit of give for when you sit in the seat, so the strain isn't entirely taken by the fabric. So it prevents the fabric from tearing, but the fabric also takes the stress off the rubber, because of course it can't stretch. You'll then need 1 strip for each side, and this is where your wires and hooks go into, and 1 strip for the middle. This Hessian does press quite nicely, so when you do the side pieces, you need to remember you're folding these over. So before you glue everything, you want to fold these in half. And then the gluing takes the time on this, just because you're waiting for the contact adhesive to cure. Before we glue any of this down, I need to prepare these rubber strips to take the glue. You only need to do this where you're actually going to be applying the glue, and this is literally just to give the glue something to grab onto. I'm also gluing onto the textured side. There's a smooth side and a textured side, and I felt like the textured side would give me a better chance of getting a decent bond. So with those sections prepped, we go back to the fabric sections. If you've got more space than I have here, I would recommend laying everything out completely. It'll make life a little bit easier for you. Only put the glue where you need it. You don't need to cover the entire surface of the rubber, just the seams where the fabric's going to stick down. This does now need to be left for a little bit. The jar says 10 to 20 minutes. That does seem to be accurate in my experience with this. If you've got the fabric aside like I have, put some weight on it when you're working outdoors, because otherwise the wind will take it and blow it across the garden. Wonder how I know that. I would also strongly recommend doing this outdoors or in an extremely well ventilated area. This stuff stinks and it will give you a headache until it's gone dry. It's not nice stuff, but hopefully that also means it's pretty strong stuff. Now that the glue's all nice and dry, it's important that it's dry to the touch. You don't want it to be tacky, because then you risk it just pulling straight off when you put the second coat on. Which is what I'm going to do now. Okay, that's our 2 coats on everything. This tub here is 250ml, and I've used about 2/3 of it to do 2 of these, so that's really the minimum that you want for doing this job. time's getting on a bit here, so I'm going to have to put everything together. The glue is nice and dry, as much as I need it to be. Now, this is why I've been doing everything on the old complete seat, because I can line up the webbing, so this edge to this edge. Don't want to do that. It's contact adhesive, that was silly. So yes, anyway, line up this outer edge, but don't worry about this inner edge. And that means I can keep everything the right size. And we'll have one more bit of gluing to do, which is gluing these two layers of fabric down, but I'm going to have to do that tomorrow. I won't have enough time to do that today because the sun is going down at the moment. But it will just be the same process. And just make sure when you actually put the fabric down, you press nice and firm. You can use rollers and things, but I find it's not really necessary. That just means that the contact adhesive, does its job. And there we go, that's basically how you make them. So we'll repeat that step for doing these side pieces here, and then we'll put all of these metal fixings, we'll just swap them straight over, and then this will be ready to go in the car. Now I would recommend as well, when you build these and you've got everything glued, if you can, leave it a day or two before fitting it to the seat, because that will allow everything to relax and glue and bond properly. If you can put some weight on it as well, even better. Contact adhesives tend to like a little bit of pressure on them to seal the bond as well as possible. As this is now, you know, you can pull on it and it doesn't come off, so that's good. And all your force on this is going to be moving this way. It's not going to be peeling up that way, and that's where the glue seems to have the strongest bond, which is really good. And of course, I'm pulling this on a small point. When you have the metal rod in here, all of the pressure is along the entire length. So you don't have one sharp point of pressure on here, it's the whole thing. Then the rubber here also stretches a bit, so that helps even out that load. And it should be good enough. But of course I won't know until it's back in the car and I'm able to drive around and test it. I really hope this glue is good enough. It's the weak link in this particular construction chain. If it turns out it's not, well, I'll just rebuild them. These are fairly easy things to fit. On the little hooks, you have 3 that are evenly spaced, a slightly larger gap, and then 2. Those 2 go to the front of the seat. You can see the witness marks here in the foam. There's your big gap, and that's the other 3 in there. So just make sure when you put that in, you've got it the right way around. The other thing to go around on this one is the wire for the seatbelt warning switch. That's what this is in here. There's only one on the passenger seat. There it is. This isn't going as well as I'd hoped. This side, perfectly fine, everything's gone in. There's a bit of tension on the fabric as you can see, but this is staying stuck down, no problems. The edge is just loose because that's not bonded there, but that's okay. This side has been much worse. It's come unbonded up here, it's coming unbonded down here, and I haven't even got all the hooks in yet. I think this panel might be either a tiny bit too narrow, which is easy to adjust. I can just unstick this side that's coming off anyway and rebond further out, or this glue's not up to the job. But since it just seems to be this one seam here that's failing, my suspicion is the panel is just a tiny bit too narrow, or this might have been the first line of glue I did, therefore I hadn't quite got the technique down. Yeah, looks like this glue's not up to scratch, because it's gone here, it's gone almost the entirety of this length here, apart from one little patch, so that hasn't worked. It's funny how it's gone in the places it's gone. I'm not sure why it's chosen to go in just a couple of places, and you can see here it's bonded to the rubber quite well, and it seems to have come off the fabric. But this was the first panel I did, so it might just be a glue issue. It could be because it's the first one I did. I'll try the other one and see if it goes any better. Unfortunately, I'm having the same glue failure issue on this one as I had on this one. Not as bad, but clearly this glue is not up to the job. If it's failing just from me putting these in, then it means it's not going to hold it as soon as you're sat in the seat. It's just going to come unglued straight away. So I shall have to do some research and find out if there's a better glue or a better system for putting these in. I can't find a replacement diaphragm. They don't exist. Nobody makes them. So I'm a little bit stuck on this one. Got the seat base unhooked, and we've left the little clips in here. We'll need those later. And I've popped the seatbelt warning light trigger back in where it lives. And this is the extra padding I'm putting in. It's a medium density foam, and it's about that thick. And it just happens to come in a square that's just about the right size for the seat, which is brilliant. I think it was about a £5. So I need to put this in here before we put the seat base on. And the reason for this is the foam that's in here is actually quite thin, so it doesn't offer as much support with these new bases on as the original sort of Hessian and rubber strips. So it just needs a little bit extra padding. And of course it does end up a little bit overstuffed, but this is going to flatten out and bed in with time. So I'm not too worried about that for now. No need to put a casing on this or anything, it just goes in and it's basically covered up with everything else. There we go, that just plops in there, and there's enough space down the sides for the hooks which hold the springs. And there's also this skirt which is part of the seat cover, and what's supposed to happen with this is it's supposed to cover the foam, and then the base goes on the top and squishes everything in, and as the foam degrades with age, that's supposed to stop it from shedding onto the carpet. Obviously, with these seats being over 40 years old now, it doesn't work quite so well, but maybe this new pad will help with that and improve matters. We shall find out when we actually get using the car again. Here we are, all the pieces laid out, ready to make a new one of these. Now the original passenger side base is actually in reasonable condition. I could reuse this. What I'm opting to do instead is actually redo the base so that both front seats match. I'll keep this one back in my spares for reference and in case I need it in the future for any reason. I've got the upholstery springs, these Parker Knoll style ones. I have 5 of those, and I have some strong cotton fabric here that's laid out and ready to make into our new pieces. Very, very simple pattern, made much easier because it's a striped fabric. I have 5 channels for the springs, and then we have the main base itself. This isn't actually offering any strength. All this does is make sure that the springs stay in the right place, and it prevents the springs from cutting through the foam. So the foam will be spread out across it, so you don't have those focus points. That should mean everything lasts a bit longer. And it should also mean that when you sit in the seat, it doesn't push the springs out the way, and then you end up with weird cavities and all the rest of it. The first thing I need to do is get this big panel down to the right size for this. And another thing I'm doing for the strength and longevity of this panel is I'll be turning the edges over and sewing down all of the edges, because that way the fabric can't fray out and stretch. And then when these are put on, it gives even more strength to it. Very easy to do this. You just line up your main panel, and luckily for us this does line up exactly on some stripes on the fabric, so then I can fold along that stripe and just sew along these long edges. When we've done that, we'll then sew along the short edges. With the sides sewn down, it's just a very simple folding over of the edge there. We now need to mark where we do the rest. So I know I need to fold it there, that end, and then just mark this with the pin. And all I need to do is sew along this edge, and that's the main basis of the new seat base. You can be quite crude with the stitching here. There's no need to do anything fancy. I haven't matched the thread. This isn't a fabric that matches anything in the car. But it doesn't matter. None of it's visible, and as long as your stitching is nice and strong and the fabric's in good condition, which this is, you're not going to have any problems. Top and bottom sewn. This side will go against the foam of the seat base, so from underneath it will be this side. That means all your raw edges are contained and out the way. Now I've already marked, using the original panel as a reference point, where the hooks go along this edge. Originally you would have had a wire going through here that the hooks go onto through this, which hooks onto the base. We're not doing that system because I can't do that with the springs, so instead the springs have a little hook on the end, and we'll hook that directly onto the hooks that go onto the seat frame. Next job is the spring casings themselves, and again the stripe fabric really helps us. I'll be turning one stripe in, top and bottom, and we'll just sew along that. Once that's sewn along, I can then put that on the main seat base piece. So I'm going to do all 5 of these, all in the same way. And I'm also going to put a new needle in the machine because the one that's in there is just a little bit blunt and it's just pulling on the fabric a bit. Got all the channels sewn together now. This one's a different colour because I might have sewn it the wrong way around. But you never see this, so it doesn't really matter. The other thing that you need to do once you've sewn the edges over is turn the ends so that they're the length of this panel here. And these will be sewn on this side of the panel, again to keep the external side nice and smooth. It means if anything goes under your seat, it's not going to snag on anything, or at least it's not as likely. The last job to finish this off is just run a line of stitching along that line there and that line there on all 5 of these. Don't sew over this end, that needs to be left open. You can press this if you want to, I'm not going to bother. And if you're wondering why the spacing looks a little bit strange, that's just because that's how it is on the seats. Here we go, one seat base all finished. It did put up a bit of a fight for some reason. These channels seem to be a bit tighter than they were on the other side, not sure why. But everything's threaded through. We've got all of the hooks available to hook onto the new seat. and then of course this is the side you would see if you took the seats out of the car. So I now have to get this fitted. I'll get Pat to help me with that. It's just a case of getting these hooks and actually hooking them on to the seat frame where the hooks are, and it can be a little bit awkward on some of them. Not a lot of space, everything's under tension, so it requires a bit of strength, and it's not very easy to film. Well, that was a fight, but it's in. And remember, this is the one where I had to replace one of the hooks that had been cut or snapped in the past. Pat had to help me with this. It was quite a struggle, and it bit me. And we think that's because the foam in this one is actually better than the foam in that one, the original foam. You can see with them side by side, that's the driver's one and this is the passenger one. It's a lot more plump. I probably could have got away with a thinner pad, but it's done. They're both sorted. I can get these back in the car now. And they're back in the car. I've had these in and out a few times, so I didn't see much point in showing you how that's done, but they look a lot more plump and they are a lot more comfortable. It's taken me a lot longer than it probably should have done to get these seats done. You know, sometimes you have these jobs and you just keep putting them off for no good reason. They're done now, they're a lot more comfortable. They're actually more comfortable than when I got them originally, several years ago, and they're probably the most comfortable seats I've had in a Princess so far, because of course I've had more than one over the years. There's a few more jobs to do, obviously, around the car, and it's all sort of bits and bobs like this. And I think that's what I'll be cracking on with. We'll get there.